Hello, everyone. This is Ed Breniger, and welcome to the Eddy Network podcast. And I'm thrilled and pleased to have a return guest, Neil Sequeira, who is, we haven't talked in quite some time, and his life has gone through some change. Welcome, Neil. Kind of since we last talked, and you were one of the early ones on the podcast. So what's gone on over the last, I guess, a year or so?
Thanks for having back on, Ed, and thank you for making the time to have a chat too. Um, it's been it's been an amazing year and a half, a lot of change and transition, as you call it. I remember the reason we connected was your post about transitions and how we're all in transitions. It's never left my mind, and I think I keep coming back to the idea that no matter where you find yourself, you're in a state of transition. 30,000 feet level comment. But yeah, since we spoke last, I've found myself out of work. My role was made redundant at the end of last year. It was a time I thought it was going to be of great distress and whatever else. And I've found it fascinating that I've gone through this whole exercise. It's been over a year, still don't have work, quote unquote, the work that I used to do. But I've been having a great time. I think I wanted to share a few of those things that have been happening, and maybe it's of use to other people.
Let me get some clarity here. You're out of the job that you were doing, and you're doing well. Is that right?
Sounds odd, doesn't it? It is. Um,
Yeah. So
I
it's
could share
not
some.
many people who can say I got fired and I'm doing well. So so that's why I wanted to hear this and share this with the world. So
Oh, thank you.
tell us the story. Tell us the story.
So when my role was being made redundant, and I had a little bit of advance notice of this happening through channels, conversations, corporate conversations, what I said, corporate conversations end up building relationships and people sharing with you that certain things are about to happen. So that advance notice absolutely helped. So I went back to a list that I had been keeping for myself for the last 15 years or so. And the list was a bucket list of sorts. These are things that I'll do when I have time on my hands, maybe when I'm retired. And that moment of redundancy or the knowledge of redundancy meant I went back and started writing and reviewing kind of the things that I'd done. Jim Rohn has been an inspiration for me. I loved his style of public speaking, but there was a talk he did about how to craft your life. I think maybe that's not the title of the thing, but he's said, make a list of the things that you'd like to do in the next 10 years. And that's what I've done several times in my life. And one of the things that stood out for me was a childhood inspiration of a bunch of bus drivers who'd actually, there were three of them, and who would wait and delay their buses so that the kids would get home in this otherwise sparsely connected village, I'd say.
Mhm.
And so when I found myself out of work, I saw a ad at the back of a bus saying bus drivers wanted. And I went, well, here's my chance. I've got time on my hands, and here's an opportunity that seems to be. And so I jumped at it. I have to say, it's the quickest response to an application that I've had. A chap called me. I made friends with him. His name is Glenn. Glenn called me and he said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I said, "Well, I've got time on my hands. What do you think?" And so within a couple of weeks, I had it all sorted. I had my license upgrades, and my very first training trip was, of course, I've driven a car before, so it's not entirely things, but you're nervous in a much larger vehicle. And my first trip was, funnily, from inside of Sydney's CBD over the Harbour Bridge with about 80 completely oblivious passengers who had no idea of the way I was feeling at that moment. And everybody was on their phones, and I was here driving over the Harbour Bridge, looking over a glorious sunset.
What's the significance of the Harbor Bridge?
Funny you should ask. When I first moved to Australia, I wanted to fly. I thought a new country would afford new opportunities, a new career in flying. I was not lucid when I was thinking about it. So when I first landed, I signed up, and my wife didn't know this until I actually did it. I signed up at a a local airport, and they had flying lessons. And I went in and I said, "Look, this is a dream I wanted to learn to fly. Could I do something of that sort?" And they said, "Oh, sure, we can. In fact, we will let you fly." It was a helicopter, not a plane. And so my first trip was again over the harbor bridge into the sunset. Well, it was about 5 in the afternoon, flying over the harbor bridge. So modes of means of transportation is something that's I've been fascinated with ever since I was a child. So I've flown over the harbor bridge. I've driven now a bus over the harbor bridge, although I had never driven a car until that moment over the harbor bridge. Um, and I have been thinking about what it means to not take the train, which I have taken the train, but to drive one over the harbor bridge. Still a hope for me.
Future endeavor.
It definitely will be. I've had certain circumstances line up in my life where that might actually become a possibility as opposed to just a hope.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So, so did I'm curious about how you, knowing that you were being redundant, redundated, is that the correct verb tense of redundant? That you
If
were going
it's
to
not,
be,
it should be.
I don't know. It's a funny word that we're using to be redundant. Because no one's redundant, but that's another discussion we'll go to later if we need to. When you knew that was coming, um, I mean, you have said to me previously that there was pressure on you forming, that that you saw things happening within the company that would let you believe that, okay, my time here is shorter than it should be.
Yeah.
So what did you do? What were the decisions that you made as you saw this coming?
I think I have always been introspective, and I think I went back to writing a lot more than I was. The
Mhm.
practice of writing has been incredibly clarifying for me. I know people swear by it, other people swear against it, but for me, it's been incredibly useful.
Yeah.
One of the things that started the initial, I'll replay that. One of the things that I did when I got to know about it was to go back to my list of things.
Hmm.
Here's an opportunity to think about things differently.
Hmm.
The other one was a book. I've shared this one with you before.
Yeah.
It's The
Inzanda.
Art of Possibility, Ben Zander.
Yeah.
And the first chapter is called It's All Invented. And I've loved it ever since I read it. I watched Mr. Zander's talk, I think about 15 years or so ago, well before I moved to Australia. And in the chapter is this question that has been the theme of a lot of my writing. And I'll read it out if you don't mind. It
Sure.
says,
Sure.
a simple way to practice the idea that it's all invented is to ask yourself this question. What assumption am I making that I'm not even aware I'm making that gives me what I see?
Huh.
When you have the answer to that question, ask yourself this one. What might I now invent that I haven't yet invented that would give me other choices? And to me, that the fact of, you can create your own choices, or you can create the context in
Mhm.
which you have other choices, has been an incredibly uplifting and a positive one.
So what was the assumption that you saw that you needed to address?
The assumption was that I needed employment to be a contribution in the world.
Say that
And,
again.
and that
Say those words again. It's very
my
important.
assumption was that I needed to be employed, or to be in employment, to be a contribution in the world. And the idea there is quite powerful, because another of the practices that the Zanders, it's actually Mr. and Mrs. Zander, or ex-Mrs. Zander, who have written a book, and they call it the world of measurement.
Uh,
So there would be times when I'd wake up in a cold sweat and thinking, oh my God, what are we going to do with money? Because if I'm not employed, how are we going to do this, that, and the other? Um, these last few months have been an education in, or a schooling in, how money necessarily stops you from thinking about other choices. And if I may share this one, it's
Yeah.
not necessarily common knowledge, and I don't even know if this should be common knowledge. But my wife has been a gardener. She learned gardening after we moved here. She's never gardened in her life, but she's a green thumb, as they call them here.
Mm-hmm.
She was rescuing food, not rescuing, she was picking up food from the local place that sold juice, fruit pulp that went into the compost bins. And she met a small community of people who hated the idea of food going to waste. And so she's been rescuing food with a few other people from things that go into the bins, but they have life in them, and then redistributing it in this time of need where cost of living is just ridiculous, to people who need the food.
Mm-hmm.
It was a small endeavor. And it's gotten to the point where that abundance of waste is actually being channeled through us, through my wife's efforts, to places and people who need it the most, including at a local soup kitchen, which feeds about 150 people, I think, every day, on weekdays, not on the weekends. And so that contribution didn't actually need any substantial amounts of money other than being able to go in the fuel to pick up the food from one place to the other. But that's it. And the feeling of being useful, of being relevant, of being a contribution has never been higher, I think, for her and for me.
That's not just amazing, but it's very much in keeping with my ideas from the circle of impact, which is all leadership begins with personal initiative to create impact, and that's what you and your wife are doing, or what she's doing, and you're joining her in that,
Enjoying it. Yes.
which I love, and and that's in a small way or significant way, whichever it may be, replaces the pressure to have a job. Instead, you have a mission or a calling. But that's not all that you're doing.
Correct.
Tell us about what else you're doing. I mean, this is,
That
uh, I just really love that you have been so free to abandon all hope and hope and actually taking initiative to do things that other people wouldn't dream of doing.
I have to say, there's a lot of inspiration. So a couple of things that may be practical, I found is, one is to cut my consumption, including and I don't mean this in a bad way. I had curated over the last 10, 15 years, um, a series of feeds. I would call them feeds because I use an RSS reader rather than subscribe to news. And over 150, maybe 250 different edu to me, educational or a schooling in life, sources of information. And for a distinct period of after the redundancy, I cut it out. I stopped consuming. So that was incredibly valuable to get back some time, because otherwise I found myself, staring at the screen.
Were you paying a fee for these
No,
sites? No, you
no.
you're just
I've
consuming
just
free content.
I love the idea of the free web, as it started, and I love the idea that people are generous with their content, because some of the best writing, including yours, Ed, I mean, came through because you wrote on Substack and put it for the world to see. The challenge was finding the good stuff in this world of,
Mhm.
there's overwhelming information and misinformation and disinformation and all of that. So it's individual, knowing the people behind the writing helped. Being referred by other people that I respect and trust helped. And so over a period of time, that compounded. And so it's been wonderful to have that.
Mhm.
But it also meant that I was not spending enough time on the things that truly mattered, which was look inward. And that's what I've been doing. That was one. The other one was the idea of fun. I think, working in a corporate environment, I have found stifling for that very reason. It's like it's a lot of pompous people, big egos, and there's not enough room for joy and fun. I had done things in the past, which I think I shared with you, but because I was out here on my own, I found, again, through my wife's small little network, a group of people who were retired and had formed a band. They were playing and they were looking for somebody to come along and join them. So I did, and I've been once a week or sometimes twice a week. We get together and play for about 2 or 3 hours practice. We've had one paid gig and a lot of fun in the practices. And I have to say something else though. Our drummer Sean's health's not all that great. He's going through chemo and stuff. And he and I have very witty repartees in during the sessions. We give each other a lot of grief. But he said something to me a few weeks ago that, was, despite the context in which he said it, it was really uplifting. And he said he had chemo that day and he was exhausted. The previous day and he was exhausted, but yet he turned up at practice. And I said, why? I mean, shouldn't you be resting? And he said, no, music is uplifting. It gives me energy. It feeds my soul. And doing it with the people that I enjoy doing it with is the best medicine for this. And we had practice on Sunday. Today is Tuesday here. And oh my God, Sean's bouncing off the walls. His energy levels were right up there. Hopefully he makes a full recovery. He's a wonderful musician and is an incredible human being. But bringing joy back into our life, I found it in the most unexpected of places, and just because I've started to pay attention to those sources of joy.
And tell us about the work you're doing with the schools.
Thank you for reminding me. Again, something that stemmed from my corporate days. Corporates have these volunteer days, and we'd go off and work with young children from disadvantaged backgrounds. And I found something lacking there, which is that these kids actually need sustained, just like my kids. I mean, nothing gets through to the kids if you tell them once or twice. You do need a sustained period of time where you're treating them as humans, as people who have their own minds and know what they do, just possibly not the capabilities to express them in a way that an adult would.
Mhm.
So a friend of mine and I have had this conversation for over a long time, and my friend actually took the initiative to start of enterprise, I will call it, a social enterprise called Inspired by You. And Inspired by You takes the idea that people in the community, particularly in corporates, feel the need for contribution. And there's a group in the community that needs some of these skills, particularly the ones where you can share, express, and find ways of discovering what's possible. Again, I think it goes back to the other possibility. So we've adopted a school in Melbourne, which is, I only discovered this rather recently. The the local area is one of the most diverse areas in Australia. So I think about 190 nationalities, people from 190 different nationalities live there. A lot of them are refugees settled in that area or have been immigrants. And the idea is that parents of these children at these schools don't have the networks, the well-established networks, even the old boys clubs that a lot of other children have. So what would it be like to help these kids discover possibilities that are currently out of reach? And so through our networks, we've had several mentors. We call them mentors, they're coaches really, to spend an hour a month with the kids in a classroom where they are safe to talk about things that are of interest to them and to talk about things that may be possible.
Mhm.
And this has been going on for the last 5 months now. So I've been out of work for 6, and this has been running for about 5 months. We designed it completely from scratch. Maybe other people have done it. I don't know, but we take inspiration in the fact that we call it ABC. So the kids need acknowledgement that they have dreams and desires, that they feel a sense of belonging with the mentors that are working with them. And C, we call it connectedness. Going back to the alphabet, right? I mean, we're doing this in a school, so it's quite poignant, I suppose. Connectedness is that they feel connected to the purpose that IBY, Inspired by You, brings to the table.
Uh-huh.
And what's been fascinating is some of the kids come from either Somalia or from Afghanistan. And particularly girls who socially and culturally, it's unacceptable for them to speak their minds, perhaps. And I'm making an assumption again. But the behavior that showed up in the first couple of sessions was that they didn't want to share what they were doing or what they had. In fact, we'd give ourselves a clap if we got 2 words out of these couple of girls. Um, Last session, the quietest one of them all, and I won't share her name for privacy reasons, but the quietest one of them all spoke up and she said she built a little um, building from Lego blocks. This was a creative expression thing. And they were expected to tell a story about what it was and why they built it. And she said, I want to be a doctor and I've built this hospital and I want to work in that space with kids. And thankfully, one of our mentors is a young doctor herself, Dr. Nishi, and she and her have connected. And who knows what will happen out of it, right? But all we're doing is creating the possibilities that lives will be changed, or at the very least, one life will be changed. And that's all that matters, one at a time.
That's fantastic. That's the power of networks. I mean,
Indeed.
we're not probably thinking of that as a network. You're thinking of, I mean, people are thinking, oh, that's his service to the community, but that is a network, and and so
Yes.
you connect with that young girl, and she connects with the doctor, and
Yes.
who knows where it ends up, 20
Exactly.
years down the road.
Yeah.
Uh,
This
this,
is
I mean, from my perspective, what you're describing is the way most of us will have to experience the future fairly soon. We'll have to be creative. We'll have to toss out our assumptions about what we have to do and what we should be doing, and be open to what is made available to us when we are simply watching and paying attention. I mean, you paid attention to the little sign in the bus. Oh, well, I could go do that. I mean, but it connected also with something you had thought about before. I think this is really a very significant um, picture of what it means to be in transition in our time today. I don't want to build your head up and say that, this is, you're the archetype. That's not what I'm trying to say. I'm saying that what you have done is a way to approach the transitions we're all in, and so we go looking for things that allow us the chance to make a difference. Um, and I've moved back to my hometown, and I've been talking to people about how I can do that. Um, I have some people who I've talked with about, these are people I knew from high school. They have connections, um, and none of this has emerged as anything that's definitive at this point. But I keep saying, well, what about this? Are we going to get together? Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? And at some point they will materialize, and who knows where it leads.
You have to have the faith, I think. But can I say something else, Ed, in
Yeah,
this
of
whole thing? Right?
course.
I mean, it feels uplifting and energizing, to hear things in hindsight. But the thing that I found, you asked me, what did I do to prepare? One of the things that I was very conscious of, and despite being conscious of and aware of, it's not a pleasant feeling going through the situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, your your heart sinks when you see, you know, other people find work, right? And you're constantly going off thinking about, oh my God, if that person could find work, why am I not doing? And there's questions of self, the idea that maybe you're not enough. Maybe what you did, you were delusional about your skills and this, that, and the other. And those moments are dark. They're not pleasant. And I think the reason why I found the reasons for joy to do things that give are fun. is to lift yourself from that, or to lift myself from that dark bowels of despair, I would say, because it can and has for me in the past been times where if it sustains for more than a couple of days, the energy required to pull me out of um, that mess is far, far higher than just doing things that are simply joyous, just simply paying attention. So to be mindful, I think for anybody else who's going through this stuff at this point in time, I think, speak about it. I mean, I don't think it's shameful to lose your job, because more often than not, it's about the company who's making the decision, not your skills. Uh, I was saying this to a friend of mine the other day that, you know, should I feel ashamed that I can't find work, even though I have tried? And my friend, in true fashion, said, "Yeah, you've tried for all of three jobs and you got rejected from them. You know how many jobs I have had to apply for?" I'm going like, "Yeah, okay." And the reality was, he pointed out for me that the first job that I did apply to drive a bus, I got a call and I got a job. So it's not like you don't have the skills. It's a question of what do you really want to do with your life. And for me, that's still a quest.
Well, it's a good question to keep the rest of your life. I mean, I just turned 71 and I'm still asking that question. I know what I can do. I know I can talk to people. I know I can answer questions. I know I can ask questions. I know I can write. Well, what is it that I should be doing? What is it where I can make the most difference? That's a question that is unanswerable at on this afternoon, on this day. I can't answer that question because the the answer has not presented itself to me. And I think we have to pursue the question in order to find the answer. And we have to be really open to letting all those assumptions go. And I had a conversation with a woman last night. She's a bit older than me, but she's still working, and she has a global reach. Remarkable person. And she sent me an email this afternoon, and said, "So you didn't tell me why you moved back to your hometown." And I'm thinking, how do I tell her that? I can't tell her that in one sentence, other than, well, I found a house to buy. That's about it. But that's not really the story. Um, and I don't know why I moved back here. But I'm gonna know within 6 months why I moved back here, and not the last 6 months, but the next 6 months, because it's a time of transition, and a lot of this is in meeting people. I mean, you've been there for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years.
In Australia, yes, 15 now.
Okay, so you already had a lot of relationships formed. I didn't have any ongoing relationships here other than connecting with people that had gone to high school with, and we would see each other maybe once a year or once every other year. So we weren't hanging out online. We weren't talking like you and I are talking, but we are now, and we go to the ball game, we go see the baseball game. Our local minor league team is a 10-minute walk for me, right over there. So we go to the ball games, we sit around, we talk about things, and and out of that comes a new relationship or a set of relationships or the introduction to an organization. It's just similar to what you're, and I think this is how we all manage. We learn to manage the transitions we're in. So let me ask you one more question, and because I think I know what you're going to say. One of the most difficult aspects of being in a transition where you're looking for work is managing things financially. So tell us about how you did that, because I know you've told me some of that. So I want to hear what you did, because I think it's a valuable insight or a valuable piece of advice for us all.
It worked in my circumstances, and it's not financial advice. I think as an accountant or a former accountant, I have to say that. One of the things that I grew up with was the idea that you live within your means. And so that's persisted. And I have to thank my parents for that. But when I got made redundant, one of the things that came with the redundancy was a handshake. And it was just enough to pay off the remaining bits of my mortgage, which I did instantly. And I know that a lot of people, financial advisors, recommend against it. They say, you should have cash and available. But what I was trading on was the feeling of freedom. Because
Mhm.
the thing that weighs on your mind constantly is that I've got this mortgage that I've got to pay and I've got to generate this income.
Yes.
And to me, yeah, that was one of the assumptions that I pulled apart, which is, so what happens if I don't have a mortgage? Will that change anything? And it was fantastic. It was just the act of saying I've paid it off and I don't have any, and I don't owe the bank anything anymore, um, was liberating in a way that I had not anticipated. I knew cerebrally that, as an accountant, that once you pay this off, it's not in there. But how it makes you feel, I think it was just probably the most important
Yeah,
thing.
and that's the point. That's the point I wanted you to share with us, because those things that hang over us, like a mortgage, like I just bought a house 5 months ago. So I've got another, what, 30 years, 30 years to pay off this thing. I'll be over 100 years old when I finally pay off this house.
I look at it this way, Ed, you'll be 100 years old.
Oh, I know, I know. I definitely know that. I definitely know that. But but I also feel that pressure to,
Yeah.
and I know that the property taxes are going up next year. I mean, all these things factor into it. So the more we can reduce outgo, uh, and
Yeah.
dependency upon, you know, the same thing going out every month, the better it is. That's really all I want. So I just,
Yeah.
when people say, what's your number one advice about transitions? I said, watch your money.
I know.
Be careful, and because you're going to need it. And my attitude, Neil, is that if I would not be surprised if I end up homeless someday. That's and so because I have that mindset that it is very possible that I could lose everything and be homeless, I'm going to act differently. I'm going to make different decisions, and one of those is, be careful in how I spend my money.
Spend money. I think I was going to go back. You reminded me when you were saying that of Jim Rohn again. And I remember one of the first talks I heard was him saying these words. He said, I found myself with too much month at the end of my money.
Yeah, I've heard him say that. Yeah,
And
yeah.
it's been over 20 years since I heard it, and I've never forgotten it. And I think that the idea of it was him describing the feeling. And I was at that point in time in my life, I think I was in precisely that moment, right? I'm not enough money at the end of the month. But how he put it was inspiring. It was just the fact that, I can relate to that. I can see it differently. It's exactly the same situation, but the way he framed it and phrased it was one, it made me laugh, and two, it made me think. And that's probably the best thing, best compliment you can give any speaker. And I mean, that's what comedians do for you all the time, make you laugh first and then make you think. Um, I don't think of him as a comedian. I think of him as a philosopher, of course, but story for another day.
Well, I'm grateful for you sharing your story. Thank you for reaching out to me. Um, I'm, when first reached out to me and you told me what your situation was, I was very sad for you because well, anyone that loses their job, I just feel very great sadness. But you have turned this thing into something of real beauty, you know, and hopefulness, and uh, and I thank you for that, because you give us um, insight into how we all can live our lives in the midst of a world of dramatic change.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you say that, and I'm glad it may be of use to other people. I mean, don't for one moment think of great beauty can be created without a whole bunch of mess in the background too. So,
Oh,
and that has been, I mean, being mindful of it is saying you can find great beauty in pretty dire circumstances and pretty dirty circumstances as well. So, um, I'm
so,
glad.
so let me ask you this. Are you still on LinkedIn?
I am on LinkedIn. I've actually been a lot less active on LinkedIn than ever before. Um, and I
Hmm.
think it's helped in some strange way. I found that, can I share this other thing with about LinkedIn?
Sure.
Is that I
Okay.
found that the way that social media and algorithms have started to push their content through has not been very helpful to my mental health and to my approach.
Uh-huh.
And the recognition of that one meant I forced myself to have to log in every time that I have to check LinkedIn. And I don't know my passwords. I've got a password manager. And I hate the idea of having to go and do these two things at once. And so it's reduced the amount of consumption through LinkedIn. But that doesn't mean I don't connect with people that way. There's been quite a few connections that have happened in the last few months through LinkedIn. But I much prefer the virtual conversations to jump on a Zoom call or a Teams call or an email if it's
Yeah.
difficult to do it. And they're so much more richer in that experience.
Well, we'll include your email in the show notes, and maybe that's all we'll include because that
Yeah.
makes it really simple. And
Yes, that'd be fantastic.
the thought of that just really pleases me. Just um, because well, we talked about all that goes into just doing the podcast, and it's so that's another story for another day,
Another day.
and uh, and I'm preparing a video that we'll talk about some of this soon. Well, Neil, thank you for joining us and telling us your story and encouraging us by your own actions. And what better thing to say about someone than their actions have encouraged us to be better people?
Thank you so much, Ed. I really, really appreciate it. And thank you for your time. And thank you for being so generous with yours as well.
Well, it's my pleasure. And folks, thank you. I hope you find this to be helpful. I know you will because it's obvious this is helpful stuff. But sign up for the podcast and hit the like button because that helps on the algorithm, I think. Though I don't pay much attention to that, but somehow I think it matters to someone. And but even more, leave your comments because those really do matter, and I share those with our guests when you offer them. So I appreciate you all very much, and we'll see you next time here on the Eddie Network podcast. Bye bye.